And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 79 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on this also not rainy, again, unbelievable. We've had 3 consecutive days of no rain here in New York. I don't know what to do with myself. Having said that, if you're checking out episode 79 on the YouTube channel or enjoying the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. Or if you're checking out episode 79 on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same rule applies. Click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So I have promised in the past that I am a horror movie fan, as evidenced by a poster, this little metal number here representing my all-time favorite horror film. And I've gotten to do more episodes dealing with horror movies as we've gone along, and as luck would have it, today is the 36th anniversary of the release date of a kind of under-the-radar classic of the genre. And it's interesting that it is under the radar because it was a box office hit, and it has a guy who became a pretty big movie star in his own right, and a famous horror film director. But sometimes, even given all those circumstances and conditions, particularly in the pre-internet era, sometimes movies are just a little bit, as we say, below the radar, or a little bit underseen by contemporary audiences, because there are guaranteed a shit ton of horror movie fans under 30 that have never seen Wes Craven's 1988 film, released February 5, 1988, The Serpent and the Rainbow. And that's going to be the main focus of the discussion today, which is an adaptation of a book by an anthropologist and researcher by the name of Wade Davis. And Bill Pullman is the star of Serpent and the Rainbow. He had just come off saving Princess Vespa from the evil clutches of Dark Helmet in Mel Brooks' fucking great comedy Spaceballs. But he was still years away from really kind of hitting it big, because he cranked out a number of big movies in the 90s, or he was terrific in all of them, even sometimes in unconventional ways. He had a small role in the movie Singles, the Cameron Crowe really solid movie about the Seattle movie scene. He plays Bridget Fonda's doctor. She wants to have a boob job. He thinks she's already perfect. I really like you, all that. He plays Meg Ryan's, I don't want to say ill-fated paramour, but it doesn't really go the way he wants to in the movie Sleepless in Seattle, which is more about Meg and Tom Hanks getting together. And but he continued to do really quality work. While You Were Sleeping was really the key for him, opposite Sandra Bullock, a terrific romantic comedy. And then he got Independence Day. Oh, and I should also point out the movie Malice, which is another thriller that's more than 30 years old. We think that Alec Baldwin is actually going to be the lead, because the movie, it does a lot of sort of Hitchcockian misdirection. It's Bill Pullman's film. And between him and Anne Bancroft in a really cool supporting role, speaking of Mel Brooks, that was his wife, and Nicole Kidman and Alec, and Paul Guilfoyle, another great actor who is always great in supporting roles. You keep thinking that something else is going on in Malice than is, and Bill Pullman, in a similar way to The Serpent and the Rainbow, in Malice, he is a character who is much put upon, pissed on, shit on, metaphorically speaking, and he finally reaches a point where he just sort of comes to himself and says, fuck all y'all. And in The Serpent and the Rainbow, he's not an action hero. He's a researcher. He's a guy who is not necessarily unfamiliar in foreign lands. He speaks different languages. He knows how to blend in. He's personable. But in this movie, his character is really fucked with, to the point where there's various moments in the film where he's dead. And in one case, he actually is dead. And that's kind of the whole thing with this movie. It's loosely based on an actual zombie powder called tetrodotoxin, which it can't work the way exactly it seems to work in the movie, where you give somebody a dose and they will seem to be dead for 24 hours, and then, hey, I'm alive. That's great. Except if you give somebody a dose of 24-hour zombie powder and say, okay, Leo's dead, put him in the ground, and then you have the ultimate nightmare horror scenario of you're buried alive and eventually you're going to run out of air and you're really going to be dead. It's kind of like the old Night of the Living Dead. Well, how do you kill a zombie? You got to shoot him through the head. Okay. But shooting a human through the head is going to accomplish the same result, going to kill them too, right? Yeah, but you said to shoot them in the head. Yeah, the fucking zombies, asshole. So I've read Wade Davis's nonfiction book, The Serpent and the Rainbow. It's not really that close. It's the general idea of the movie, but the movie takes it way more into a horror film direction. Kind of like what I mentioned when I did the podcast where I discussed adaptations, where the movie version was better than the book or story, which as we know is normally not how it goes. But Clive Barker's The Forbidden, I don't even know if I would consider that a horror short story, but the movie is horrifying. The movie Candyman, of course. It wouldn't have worked if they had called it The Forbidden, if they called it The Forbidden. But in The Serpent and the Rainbow, Bill Pullman plays this researcher. It's Wade Davis in real life. Oddly enough, Wade Davis is named a Major League pitcher. I used to joke about that with my dad. Hey, look, it's the guy from Serpent and the Rainbow. But he plays a researcher who, cliche, but he gets in way over his head. And the movie also does something different that you normally don't see in a sort of classic horror movie, because this one has not really monster elements, but surrealist, extra sensory, supernatural kind of stuff, dealing with voodoo and mind-altering substances and whatnot. But the movie actually takes place in Haiti at a very delicate time in their history, where Duvalier, Aristide, different real-life historical figures, we don't really meet them, but we get a sense that there are larger forces at work than just this particular story of horror, that this country is in really rough shape. And one of the characters even says, we're teetering on the edge between basically a brutal dictatorship and an attempt at democracy, and nobody really knows how this is going to shake out. So the substance of the story is that Bill Pullman learns of this potentially life-saving substance. See, that the interesting part of this and the movie is the tease that this compound could have real medicinal uses. Not somebody saying, hey, I think smoking heroin might extend your life. No, that there are real medicinal uses, that it could be used from an anesthetic perspective, that there might be a use for it. So he's not just, there's a little bit of Indiana Jones. There's moments in the film where Bill's character almost has an Indiana Jones look to him, but he's not doing it necessarily for fortune and glory. He's doing it because, hey, we might be able to help some people going down the road. And so he gets in way over his head with people, some of whom he thinks are nefarious and aren't, and then others who he expects to not be nefarious and they are. And that's where the kind of drama and some of the horror, takes place. And so we're going to avoid spoilers throughout here. The movie is really worth seeing, and it grossed just under 3 times its production cost. It wasn't a huge budget. Bill Pullman was not pulling in 10, 12, 15 million a picture at that juncture. And Wes Craven was able to get it done. The budget is listed at 7 million. It made 19 to 20 million at the box office. And it's not, I did not see it in theaters. I was just a kid. But I remember my father took me to see a different film. We saw the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Red Heat in theaters. That's the first Arnold movie I saw in theaters. It was 1988, I believe. And the trailer for Serpent and the Rainbow played before that movie. And I had seen Spaceballs. Big fan. I realized as soon as this trailer plays, that's Lone Star from Spaceballs. Okay, this is not a funny movie at all. And the last thing in the trailer is Bill Pullman with white, like his face has some kind of white powder on it, and he has a cross etched into his forehead. And he appears to be dying. And he says, "Don't let them bury me. I'm not dead." And that's a kind of iconic line from the movie, and it's on most of the posters. And it's a great tease to get people interested, because that doesn't really mean anything. Don't let them bury me, I'm not dead. Well, bro, you're talking. No shit, you aren't dead. It's similar to DOA, the original DOA with Edmund O'Brien, a film, and then they did a remake with Dennis Quaid, which was, it's okay. It's just okay. Big Dennis Quaid fan. Love Meg Ryan. She's good in that movie. It's basically, at least in the Dennis Quaid version, about a college professor and author, I think he's also an author, who is murdered, but he's not murdered in a conventional way. He's given something similar to the zombie powder from The Serpent and the Rainbow, only it is going to kill him in 24 hours as opposed to render him incapacitated for 24 hours and then, hey, I'm great. Let's go to happy hour. When we think of the career of Wes Craven, and this is what I was talking about under the radar, generally speaking, big horror movie fans, if they're Gen Xers, they're probably the first thing they're going to say is A Nightmare on Elm Street. And even though he didn't direct all of the movies in the series, he was involved, and it's his franchise. We think of Nightmare on Elm Street, and we think Wes Craven. The older people, the first movie they might say, it could be Last House on the Left, which is a very weird, almost a horror movie reboot of an Ingmar Bergman film, as fucking crazy as that is. The Virgin Spring. Imagine having a Bergman film and turning it into a slasher flick. It's kind of like what Wes Craven did there. But we think of Nightmare on Elm Street, especially Gen Xers. And Gen Xers and elder millennials, some might even say Scream first, because Scream was also, although he didn't write the screenplay, I'm sure he did work on it. It was Kevin Williamson, who then went on to do The Faculty and Dawson's Creek and a lot of other things. I think he might have written Teaching Mrs. Tingle. Not sure about that one. But we think of Craven, and it is rare that somebody is going to immediately mention The Serpent and the Rainbow. And I remember when I was at NYU Film School, it actually wasn't the class, the horror film, you'd think that it was. It was a different class. It was language of film. And Wes Craven's New Nightmare hit theaters. That's the kind of last of the initial iteration of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, where you had the original cast, although that one was an interesting spin on it. The actress who played Nancy, Heather Langenkamp, plays herself in the movie, and Robert Englund, who plays Freddy Krueger, actually pulls double duty. He plays Robert Englund, and he also plays a more brutal interpretation of Freddy Krueger. So a lot of us were talking about seeing the movie. Hey, you're going to go see New Nightmare? Yeah, actually I am. I saw it opening day, and I was hugely disappointed. I thought the first hour, it's almost like Craven was doing a test run of what he was going to try with Scream, which was make a horror movie that is about itself, that calls attention to itself. Hey, it's like we're in a horror movie. Don't go to a room alone or the killer's going to get you. The first hour of New Nightmare, I was riveted. I thought, holy shit, this is fantastic. And then it just totally goes off the rails. And I walked out of the theater after seeing New Nightmare pissed off. Like, there aren't that many times. There are times you see a movie that's bad. Okay, this movie just didn't work. This is boring. This is absurd. I left the theater actively angry, leaving Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And I know that there are plenty of people that will say in the initial slate, Nightmare on Elm Street 1, great. Johnny Depp, young Johnny Depp, really doesn't do anything. He has a bigger role than I remembered. And Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, generally regarded to be the best of the sequels. But there are people that will say, no, New Nightmare is the second best in that series. And as far as Scream, I saw the first Scream in theaters, packed crowd, saw it with a big crowd. My mom, her guy, my sister, a bunch of my sister's friends, a great movie-going experience. So Wes Craven is a guy who could make these kind of renegade, sort of ballsy, nervy, unconventional horror films, like Deadly Friend he did in the 80s. but he could also deliver the goods with straightforward horror. And in the case of Scream, laughs. And that's what he was trying to do with New Nightmare. He was trying to, sort of poke fun. We call it intertextuality in film school, self-referential. Yes, Scream is very self-referential, consistently calling attention to itself. What's his name? Matthew Little, that classic moment in Scream where they keep saying, whatever you do, don't say, I'll be right back. Because in horror movies, when you say, I'll be right back, you're about to be bumped off. They don't do anything of that in Serpent and the Rainbow. Bill Pullman and Kathy Tyson, his co-star, Zach Smokey, Brent Jennings, Conrad Roberts, and what's the other actor? Paul Winfield. Good role for Paul Winfield. None of them are calling attention to themselves. It is just straightforward, slow descent into either madness or terror or both, and certainly mysticism and the surreal. But another thing I remember is that from the kind of Wes Craven career perspective, Vampire in Brooklyn hadn't come out yet. That was a movie I actually really liked. I loved that Eddie Murphy was trying something different, as I talked about. When people known for one thing go outside the box, props. And Wes Craven wanted to make a vampire movie, but do it Eddie Murphy style and give Murphy room to try to be funny. And I thought that movie really worked. Angela Bassett, dynamite. Kadeem Hardison was great. It didn't really hit. It wasn't until Nutty Professor that Eddie made his comeback. But the idea is that even Wes Craven, before Scream, he was moving in the direction of not just doing straightforward, dead teenager type movies. He was trying different things. And you can succeed, and sometimes the people just don't go to see the movies. So I remember this guy was, as a whole bunch of us film students, us kind of elitist fucking clowns, if you ask me, like me age 20 needed a lot of help, needed a lot of help. But the idea was, what's your favorite Wes Craven film? A lot of people, what's your favorite Wes Craven film? Most people in that room said A Nightmare on Elm Street. Some people, a couple of kids, said Last House on the Left. Now bear in mind, a movie made in the late 1970s now feels like ancient history. It's 45 years. It kind of is ancient history. But in 1994, it's not really ancient history. It's 2008, 2009 relative to today. So some people said Last House on the Left. Nobody said Deadly Friend. Nobody said any of his other kind of sort of under the radar, because he did some other movies in the early 80s. But one person said People Under the Stairs. And everyone's looking around and like, what? People Under the Stairs? That sucked. And I'll never forget, the guy goes, I know. He was saying that he hated every single film that Wes Craven had made to that point. I didn't agree with him, but I thought it was funny that he picked People Under the Stairs. It was the least terrible of all of Wes Craven's terrible films. It was like, bro, you know nothing, but okay, that's funny. When it was my turn, I said The Serpent and the Rainbow, and most people liked it. There were a few that actually hadn't seen it. Who said, okay, well, what made you say that one? I said, it tells a complete story. It's not a franchise type movie. It was always going to be a one-off. It creates a narrative around a true event that took place, and it goes in directions you're not expecting. And it deals with real history of a region that has always had strife, has always had dictatorships and strongmen and just really negative stuff. And it works despite the fact it shouldn't. Because you normally, in a horror movie, you don't get into all of that political and philosophical upheaval and people debating, like there's a little bit of it in the movie where you have the kind of upper crust academics, intellectuals, elitists, and people with money that the main character, Bill's character, knows. And there's a little bit of that sort of hoity-toity conversation of, well, maybe you shouldn't go back there. There's a door to the mystical and you've just walked through it. Michael Gough, the original Alfred in the Michael Keaton run of Batman movies, great in Serpent and the Rainbow. He plays that kind of character. He's not a butler, but he's the upperclassman type who is saying, you don't need to be fucking around here, Doc. You don't need to. And Bill Pullman's like, well, yeah, I do. They're not going to scare me off. I'm going back. If this is where I go, this is where I go. But there's too much at stake, and this research is too important. And that's the other thing. You have horror movie elements taking place, But in the back of your mind, there's always the idea of this shit could really help people. There definitely could be a medicinal use here. We see why they're interested and why the bad guys are interested too. And in a similar vein to like Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, which dealt with something called the Genesis device, where you could create essentially terraforming an entire planet with life, with food, sustainable Earth-like oxygen and all of that sort of stuff. But if put in the wrong hands, it is a death weapon because the terraforming will destroy all life on the planet while the terraforming is taking place. This came up I think in Man of Steel, the first Henry Cavill Superman movie, a similar concept. So in the world of Serpent and the Rainbow, tetrodotoxin is used for horror film purposes, but we know this is something that in the right hands, maybe there's an angle here. Maybe this could be a sort of anesthetic that a person they'll never wake up during surgery. They will never be screaming in pain because something went wrong with the anesthetic. Doctors will be able to do even very risky and difficult and painful procedures without fear of the patient moving around or whatever the case might be. My first time seeing Serpent and the Rainbow was at home on VHS. We had a video store a couple of blocks away. South Shore Video on Merrick Road in Massapequa, near the All-American Hamburger Stand, which is still there, and right by the cross of Merrick Road and Route 107. Route 107 pretty much ends right over there. And I loved it on first viewing. Unlike this movie, Angel Heart, where the first time I saw it, and I talked about this a little embarrassing, I pretty much only watched that movie because I heard that Lisa Bonet got really naked in it, and I was a kind of sweaty, horny, pathetic 14-year-old boy, as we all were, or most of us were at that age. We could say that we were, our hearts and minds weren't really in the right place, but we've all grown since then, I hope. But I mostly fast-forwarded through Angel Heart, and when all of the crazy shit took place in the third act, it didn't hit me the way that it otherwise would have if I had actually watched the movie the way that it was intended to be seen. So that movie didn't hit me on first viewing as, oh my God, this is amazing. When I watched it in full from the beginning, I then was riveted. And even though the twists had kind of been given away, the movie absolutely blew my mind, even on a 13-inch television. Holy shit, what a fucking movie I just watched. Serpent and the Rainbow, loved it. First time I saw it on VHS, fantastic. And it didn't bother me that Bill Pullman was doing something completely different. Even me at age, 14 going on 15, I said, hey, this is terrific. Presumably he got this part because of, playing Lone Star in Spaceballs. And also the fact that the movie Ruthless People with Bette Midler, he is fucking hilarious. He really sells it. I forgot the name of the actor, but he's working kind of with Danny DeVito's character to try to get rid of Bette Midler. And the character he plays in that movie is so dumb. He's so dumb. And one of the actors actually is almost reading the minds of the audience, where all at once we're all thinking, this guy is a fucking moron. As I remember watching the movie, as I'm thinking, I can't believe how stupid his character is in this film, one of the guys is talking about him. He goes, this might be the dumbest man in the entire world. True. So I've been a fan since then. It's the kind of movie I check in on every couple of years to see if it still works the same way. And it's true that sometimes things that either really rattle us and work on us, we see them again and it's not the same. I remember as a kid thinking the original Batman series with Adam West was, oh my God, this is amazing. It's really not that good. The seams are showing through. The fight scenes are not really very well choreographed, if we're being honest. The stunt work is flagrantly obvious. Well, that's not Burt Ward. That's some 50-year-old guy pretending to be, whatever it might be. Serpent and the Rainbow was very well constructed. And the special effects they're mostly mechanical effects done during production. And CGI is way better now than it was in its infancy in the 80s and even to some extent into the 90s. But movies that are able to achieve believable practical special effects are timeless. And The Serpent and the Rainbow, also because it is a period piece. It's not set any time other than just before. You don't have any nobody had a hairstyle like that. Nobody dressed like that. It is a movie that to me is always going to work. And dare I say, despite the fact that it was a hit, it is a movie that is waiting to be rediscovered by a new generation of horror fans that want something different other than the torture porn that is super popular, where characters just basically are screaming in agony and pain for the sake of, making a buck, selling it. And, and I don't automatically discount movies where characters suffer. It's not what I'm saying. But when all it is torture, suffering, and one kill sequence after another, no, not for me. Barbarian has moments of torture and suffering, sure, but Barbarian works. It draws you in. There's crazy shit. And there's a mystery as to what the fuck is going on in this house that, it's owned by Justin Long. Now I understand what he's doing in this movie. Serpent and the Rainbow tells a fully formed story of horror with horror elements. And it does it in a believable fashion. I mean, it's a more believable horror film than Nightmare on Elm Street. I would say that of all of the movies in Wes Craven's career that are classified as horror, it is the most straightforward and the most believable, using real-world elements to kind of keep us more grounded than we might be in other films, even though otherworldly things take place. And Bill Pullman's performance, he's just one of those people on a lesser scale than, let's say, a Gene Hackman. He is reliably great. I've never seen Bill Pullman take a performance off or not be committed to a role. He always brings it, gives it what he has. And you look at While You Were Sleeping, that could have been a throwaway role. He sells it. He makes you really care. Even Sleepless in Seattle. There are plenty of people saying, you know what, Meg didn't deserve him. And even there's kind of that little somewhat of a joke in the movie where Meg's character kind of says that. Because as much as his character is presented as a bit of a fuddy-dud, he's a good guy. And Meg, he just wasn't the right guy for her. It doesn't mean that he was not a good guy. But he really nails that part. That could have easily been a throwaway as well. And even as a president, President Whitmore in Independence Day, that's the kind of role where an actor could simply show up and read his lines. And, it's just, Stallone talked about it. Sometimes in these action movies, you're just a piece in an erector set. Nowadays, there's green screens going kablooey behind me. I might as well be nowhere. I'm supposed to be standing in a tunnel, and we were just talking about daylight. I'm supposed to be standing in a tunnel in New York City, and there's all kinds of, I'm on a soundstage in Los Angeles. So yes, the Bill Pullman performance in Serpent and the Rainbow, much like the Bill Pullman performance in Singles, in Malice, in While You Were Sleeping, in Independence Day, and in a number of other films in his really solid career. His son is really good. Lewis was in Top Gun Maverick. I believe he played Monica Barbaro's character's partner. Looks a lot like him. Lake Placid, another kind of, if you want to call it horror, but that's a little bit of a stretch. That movie's just absurd, even though it was a hit and it is kind of a cult film. But Bill Pullman is always somebody, and Spaceballs is just a comedy. But he brings it there too. He comes across as if he's committed to making the character of Lone Star believable. He's not just getting laughs. In that movie, as much as the character is often portrayed in a bit of a buffoonish sort of light, he still sells that this, at heart, is a Han Solo type of character, just in a comedy. And he makes you feel that he really cares for the princess. And it's not easy to do when in a comedy. He did a dark comedy with, of all people, Ellen DeGeneres. And I remember when it came out, he got a lot of acclaim for that role, Mr. Wrong, because he did something different. He seems to be playing the charming, handsome guy, similar to While You Were Sleeping, but this guy is fucking sociopath. And that movie almost goes into horror film territory because he's so Mr. Wrong. But in Serpent and the Rainbow, as a real-life individual named Wade Davis, or Dennis Allen in this movie, he keeps the film grounded, which makes the horror that we see in the movie feel all the more real. And I hope that some of you who are horror movie fans and are not familiar with this film will give it a shot. Unfortunately, it's not available to stream. It's available to stream. I should say it's not free on streaming. So if you want to see the movie, if you want to see it at this juncture, you'll have to, I hate telling people to spend money. I really do. And I'm being serious when I say that. But it is available to rent on Apple Plus and Prime and some of the other platforms. It is a movie that I have seen. It was free on Amazon Prime. I believe it was free on Hulu. Hulu had a lot of horror films. I don't recall it ever being on Netflix. It's the kind of thing that I would remember. But if you're interested, on my recommendation, and you can light me up in the comments. I always say I'm kind of joking around, but I'm not really joking, because the give and take, especially with horror, a genre I love so much, you're normally not going to get as much polarization in other genres like Westerns or especially musicals. You're not going to have people say, oh my God, Top Hat is a piece of shit. Swing Time with Fred Astaire and Rogers is horrible. How could you have recommended it? But in horror, there is a lot of that, because horror is subjective. It's so subjective. Movies that we think are going to work don't. Stories that should be great didn't get there. And I love Malignant, and a lot of people said, it's fucking garbage. It was terrible. And they'll say they prefer any of the Saw movies to Malignant. I say, you're fucking nuts. What the hell? At least Malignant told a complete sentence. But that's all good. Healthy debate, especially when it comes to movies, it's the lifeblood for somebody like me who grew up watching movies and writes and loves to talk movies with anybody. And the joke that I always told is there are certain segments of my kind of savant-like memory, and I'm not ripping on myself when I say that. My memory is just unusual. And I often joke, and this is what I'm going to close on, I know more about silent movies than the next 10,000 people that you can pick off the street. Do you know how rare it is that one gets to talk about silent film under normal circumstances? Even among movie fans, it's rare that you're going to get to bring it up. This is one reason why I enjoyed the episode that I did on vampire movies, because I got to talk about 2 silent films. Carl Dreyer's Vampire, which actually is not a silent film. It's a sound film that plays like a silent film, but F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu, which, as I say, Robert Eggers is remaking as we speak. It might be in post, with Willem Dafoe and Bill Skarsgård, who played Pennywise in it and was great in Barbarian. It's amazing. Barbarian, a horror movie, had 2 incredible supporting performances, one by Justin Long, the other by Bill Skarsgård. In both cases, the movie plays against what we expect from those actors brilliantly. Serpent and the Rainbow, it doesn't necessarily play against expectation unless you go back in time to when Bill Pullman had mostly made comedies. And now he's in a real-world horror film set in the mid-'80s, and the movie came out in 1988. So, Serpent and the Rainbow, released on this day, 36 years ago, highly recommended. And if you're familiar with it and like it, don't like it, let me know in the comments. And if you see it or plan to see it, let me know what you think. And with that, we've reached the end of episode 79 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here once again. If you've checked out episode 79 on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 80 real soon. Till then, take care.